For today's video, we're going to talk about some of the most common reasons pet shrimp die in our aquariums. Hopefully the tips and tricks I'm going to share will help you avoid these problems in your own aquariums and create thriving shrimp colonies. So first up is ammonia and nitrite toxicity, which is one of the most common causes of shrimp deaths in the aquarium. This usually happens when an aquarium hasn't been properly cycled yet, but it can also result from overfeeding and other issues later in the tank's lifetime. Most sources do seem to agree that ammonia is still extremely toxic to shrimp, but there is some debate about how toxic nitrite is. While a few social media posts do suggest that it's not as harmful to shrimp as it is to fish, personally there's not enough solid research out there to sway me, so I treat both of them as toxic to shrimp. I highly recommend fully cycling your tank before you add your shrimp to it, and if you're not sure how to do that, I link to my video on the dark start cycling method in this video's description. If your tank is already established and for whatever reason you notice a spike in either ammonia or nitrite, then you can do a large water change to normalise the conditions and monitor the water parameters for the next couple of days to make sure everything is safe. But the good news is that although ammonia and nitrite may be an issue for beginners cycling their very first shrimp tank, once you've done it once you can just repeat the process over and over and over again, so usually it isn't really an ongoing problem. Next up is failed molts, which is a serious issue where our shrimp get stuck in their old exoskeleton and can't fully shred it, leading to their death. Now there are a few different causes to this, but two of the most common ones are related to our water hardness. So first up we have the actual general hardness or GH of our aquarium water. The exact target range will depend on the specific shrimp species you keep because it does change, but for neocaridina shrimp, which I personally keep in all of my tanks, the recommended range is between 4 and 10 DGH. If your water is too soft or hard, it can make the carapace of your shrimp either too tough or too stretchy, preventing your shrimp from being able to molt out of it successfully. If you're working with soft tap water like I do, then there's various shrimp salt products on the market that can bring your GH up to a suitable level, and I have tried them, but personally I really haven't seen that much of a difference, but my tap water is right at the bottom range of what's recommended. The second issue is the actual composition of your general hardness or GH reading. Unfortunately, a GH test kit won't be able to tell us the exact ratios between those different minerals, so while you still may have your GH within the recommended range for the shrimp species you want, the actual ratio between calcium and magnesium could still be off and cause problems. That's why a lot of shrimp keepers use reverse osmosis water and then they'll remineralize it with a shrimp salt that's been designed to have the exact ratio of calcium to magnesium that's needed for that specific type of shrimp. Now I'm not 100% sure about this third possible cause, and it might just be one of those myths that get out of hand, but I have seen people say that as crustaceans age, they eventually run out of energy that's required to actually get out of the carapace as they molt. Now most of the people I've seen talking about this are specifically talking about lobsters, but as our shrimp age, this might just be one of those things that bring the shrimp towards the end of its life. That said, I really do think that a lot of people will have suitable minerals in their tap water that allow your shrimp to molt successfully, especially neocaridina and ammonia shrimp, which I personally keep, but it is something to be aware of. Next up I want to talk about acclimatizing your new shrimp to their new home because water parameters may vary and potentially cause problems. Now there is a lot of conflicting advice online about this, but personally I do think it matters more about the specific country that you live in. Even then though, I personally recommend you still try and get a cheap drip tube or some pipettes or maybe some airline tubing or something like that, so you can add water from your shrimp tank down into a container holding your new shrimp, which contains the water they were shipped in. This just gives your shrimp time to adjust gradually to the differences in water chemistry and hopefully increase survival rates. That said, I know several experienced shrimp keepers both in the United States and Germany who don't actually acclimate their shrimp at all, they just instantly add them to their shrimp tank. But over 90% of households in the United States have hard tap water, and the percentage in Germany is also quite high too, which means that the water parameters in those specific setups are relatively close to what the breeder has. For example, look at this map of water hardness in the United States, and if you check the key on the top, you'll notice that there's no mention of soft or even neutral zones because they are just too small to be worth adding to the graph. So in places like that, I can see why a lot of people just put their shrimp straight into their tank because there might not be that much of a difference in water parameters. Here in the United Kingdom though, and many other countries, it is a very different story, and our water parameters can change by neighbourhood in the same city, never mind different counties. I get my shrimp from Best Aquarium Shrimps UK, and according to Kintico's postcode checker, they are based in an area with soft to moderately hard water. I have soft water at home, but even within my city, water hardness can vary depending on where that specific district of the city sources their water from. While I have moved shrimp directly between my own tanks because I know the water parameters are similar, I don't think I've ever added shrimp from a breeder directly to the tank without taking the time to do the drip method. But even then though, there is a trade-off because ammonia and nitrite can be building up in the transit water that the shrimp were shipped in, and then there's really not that much evidence that taking the time to actually drip acclimate your shrimp offers that much of a benefit as well, so it is something that you're going to have to decide whether you want to do or not. Next up is hunger, and this one actually becomes a problem in two main ways. The first one is accidentally overstocking your tank, and this one can be easy to do because there's a lot of breeders who do deals if you buy 50 shrimp or more, but I don't personally recommend that if it's your very first shrimp tank. I always recommend you start with between 10 and 20. This is the exact strategy I use in all of my tanks, where I'll put a small population of shrimp in there and then I'll let them breed up to a level that tank can support. While I do have some 25 litre or 6.6 US gallon aquariums that have between 80 and 100 shrimp in them, I'm not just leaving them to eat the algae and biofilm and detritus that builds up in the tank, I'm also target feeding the shrimp too. In my opinion, this really isn't that much of a risk provided you are going to target feed your shrimp and add some food for them to eat every single day. But the second way that hunger becomes a problem, and I do think I'm having issues with this in my own tanks, is due to competition, especially from snails that can reproduce in fresh water. In some of my tanks I keep ram's horn snails and they constantly compete with the shrimp for biofilm and algae. On top of that, when I target feed the invertebrates in those tanks and add some food pellets, the snails simply form a ball around them and prevent the shrimp from getting it. I have tried using microgranule foods that scatter through the full tank to try and give my shrimp the best chance of getting some food as possible, but even then I do think the population of my shrimp in the tanks that also have ram's horn snails is steadily declining. So going forward, I personally plan to just keep neorite snails in my non-shrimp breeding tanks and just keep my shrimp breeding tanks with nothing but shrimp in them to avoid this issue, because neorite snails' eggs won't hatch in fresh water. Next up is overcleaning your tank, which is something that can be a problem in a few different ways. One of the most common mistakes is overcleaning your biological filter media. If you clean this too often or too long, you may cause problems with your beneficial microorganism colonies that help maintain safe and stable water parameters in the tank. Personally, I give my biological media a quick rinse in old tank water for maybe 15 seconds when I do a water change, and it's easily enough to get rid of any trapped debris without disrupting the microorganisms on there. The second way that overcleaning can cause problems with your shrimp population is by removing potential food sources. Now this one will come down to personal preference and what you want your tank to look like, but I choose to leave decaying plant leaves in my tank the majority of the time. It really doesn't take long for my shrimp to start feeding on the decaying parts of the plant, and that just adds a free, natural food source to their diet. Another thing that I've learned the hard way is that scraping algae off the tank glass, especially in breeding tanks, may reduce the available food supply for baby shrimp. Now I can't remember the exact source, and I do think it was Grant from the Garden of Eden channel who initially put me onto this. In one of their live streams, he mentioned that scraping the algae off the side panels of their breeding tanks did seem to slow down the population growth of their shrimp colonies. Now I'm not sure if this really does help or not, if I'm honest, but I have seen baby shrimp grazing on tank glass algae on the side panels countless times. So for maybe the last 6 to 7 months or something like that, I've only been scraping the algae off the front glass panel of the tank so I can still see into it, but there's still those food sources on the sides. The next one is usually easier to confirm than all of the other ones because it's predation or your fish eating your shrimp. The tricky part with this one is that it can be very, very unpredictable because it really does depend on the personality of the fish you keep. The best example that I can offer is that the first betta fish I ever kept hunted every shrimp in her tank to a level where I ended up netting the survivors out and just moving them to another aquarium. But we can contrast that with the behaviour of my second betta fish, who was an absolute sweetheart and would just stay there and watch the shrimp moving around in his tank constantly for hours every day, and I never saw him try to eat one once. Then there's my third betta fish, who left all of the adult shrimp alone, but he would snack on baby shrimp if they got too close to him. And then finally we have my fourth betta fish, who really doesn't bother the shrimp much, but she will steal their food pellets once they've eaten enough of it so it's small enough to fit into her mouth. Unfortunately, the only way we're going to know how our fish will react to having shrimp in their tanks is to just try it. Finally, we get to copper toxicity, which is a known shrimp killer, but the actual levels that was required to cause fatalities is questionable. On top of that, some research has shown that at least some species of shrimp are more sensitive to copper than others, with levels being able to affect shrimp being as low as 0.1 milligrams per litre. But at that low level, the observed effects was usually colour changes or patchy coloration on the shrimp, but we really don't know the long-term effects of what that's doing to the shrimp. The most common way that copper gets into our aquariums is through tap water when doing water changes. Here in the United Kingdom, the legal limit for copper in tap water is up to 2.0 milligrams per litre or 2 ppm. Now that should easily be enough to cause problems for our shrimp, but thankfully I couldn't find a single incident of levels getting anywhere near that for a consistent period of time. I did look up the water quality report for Greater London, which has the highest population density here in the United Kingdom. The highest recorded copper reading in the tap water was 0.127 milligrams, which is probably high enough to cause some mild irritation and colour changes in shrimp, but not enough to be fatal for a lot of species. And even then, that was the absolute highest reading, with the average reading just being 0.06 milligrams per litre. But a lot of people over in the United States use different water sources such as well water, so copper is definitely something to monitor in your shrimp tank. And that brings us on to how freshly added aquarium plants may temporarily spike the copper levels in the tank. Although I have seen some sources say that it's because the copper is secreted out of the plant due to high levels of fertilisation being done in the nursery, I personally think that a lot of it is in the rock wool that's used as a growing medium. To avoid this, you can just take extra care removing the rock wool in any new plants you keep in your tank, but thankfully, as Tropica's recent videos show, they are getting rid of rock wool altogether and they're switching over to a clip system, so that shouldn't be an issue for much longer. Anyway guys, that brings the video to an end and I hope it's been helpful. Thanks for watching and good luck growing your shrimp colonies.